The mind never stopped speaking. Even when the world outside fell silent, even when the room was dark and the clock no longer ticked loud enough to be noticed, the voice inside continued its endless commentary. It judged the past, feared the future, replayed moments that had already dissolved into memory, and imagined disasters that had not yet been born. The person sitting alone on the edge of the bed felt as if thoughts were not something happening in the mind, but something happening to the mind, as if the mind had become a crowded marketplace where every voice shouted at once and none listened. Sleep had become rare, peace even rarer, and silence felt almost frightening because silence gave space for thoughts to grow louder. There was a time when this person believed that thinking more would solve everything. Every problem seemed like a puzzle that could be fixed if analyzed deeply enough. If one thought long enough, carefully enough, intelligently enough, surely the correct answer would appear. But the opposite happened. The more the mind tried to control life through thought, the more chaotic it became. Decisions multiplied instead of simplifying. Emotions became tangled in logic. Fear disguised itself as preparation, and imagination turned into a prison. The mind became a place of endless loops where questions gave birth to more questions, and certainty slipped further away the harder it was chased. One evening, exhausted by this inner storm, the person sat quietly and noticed something unusual. Thoughts were rushing as always, but for the first time, instead of trying to stop them, there was a simple observation. These thoughts are happening, but who is watching them? That single question did not demand an answer. It opened a door. The realization arrived slowly, not as an idea but as a feeling. There was a difference between the mind that thinks and the awareness that watches thinking. This was the first crack in the wall overthinking had built. Carl Jung once suggested that much of our suffering comes from unconscious material trying to reach consciousness. Overthinking, in this light, was not an enemy, but a signal. The mind was not broken. It was overloaded with unexamined emotions, ignored fears, unlived instincts, and rejected parts of the self. Thoughts were not the problem. Resistance to what those thoughts represented was. The mind kept speaking because something inside had not been heard. As the person continued to sit, memories surfaced. Moments of embarrassment, failure, rejection, and loss. Each memory carried emotion, and each emotion had once been pushed away in the name of strength or logic. The mind had learned to replace feeling with thinking. Instead of sadness, it created analysis. Instead of fear, it produced scenarios. Instead of anger, it formed self-criticism. Overthinking was not excessive intelligence. It was emotional avoidance wearing the mask of reason. A deep understanding began to emerge. The mind overthinks when life is not being lived honestly. Jung believed that the psyche seeks wholeness, not perfection. When parts of the self are denied, they return through symptoms. Overthinking was one such symptom, a call from the shadow. The shadow was not evil. It was simply the rejected self knocking repeatedly on the door of awareness. The person noticed that certain thoughts appeared again and again, like recurring dreams. Fear of being judged, fear of making the wrong choice, fear of not being enough. These were not random. They pointed toward unhealed wounds and unmet needs. Instead of fighting these thoughts, the person tried something radical, listening. Each thought was allowed to finish its sentence without interruption. Each emotion beneath the thought was felt in the body instead of argued with in the mind. At first, this was uncomfortable. Silence revealed feelings long buried under mental noise. The body held tension where words had failed. The chest felt heavy, the stomach tight, the breath shallow. But something extraordinary happened when the person stayed present instead of escaping into analysis. The thoughts began to slow, not because they were forced to stop, but because they were finally being acknowledged. Jung spoke of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are by integrating conscious and unconscious elements. Overthinking often happens when life is lived according to expectations rather than inner truth. The mind tries to calculate safety in a world where authenticity feels dangerous. The person realized that many thoughts were attempts to predict how others would react, how mistakes would be judged, how failure would define identity. The mind was trapped in a social mirror, constantly adjusting itself to imagine eyes. A quiet rebellion began. Instead of asking, "What if this goes wrong?" the person asked, "What part of me is afraid right now?" Instead of rehearsing future conversations, attention was brought back to the present moment, the sensation of breathing, the feeling of feet on the floor, the weight of the body in space. The mind protested at first. It offered urgent reasons to think more. But slowly it learned that presence was not a threat. Overthinking feeds on time, on the past that cannot be changed and the future that does not yet exist. Jung emphasized the importance of living symbolically, meaningfully, rather than mechanically. The person began to see thoughts as symbols rather than commands. A catastrophic thought was not a prediction. It was a symbol of fear. A self-critical thought was not truth. It was a symbol of an old voice internalized long ago. One night, a powerful insight surfaced. I am not required to believe every thought I have. This realization did not come from logic, but from experience. Thoughts were seen rising and falling like clouds. Some were dark, some light, some meaningless. None stayed forever. The watcher remained. Overthinking lost its authority when it was no longer mistaken for identity. Jung warned against trying to destroy the ego. Instead, he taught balance. The ego has its role. It organizes life, but it becomes tyrannical when it tries to control everything. Overthinking was the ego's attempt to dominate uncertainty. Life, however, does not submit to control. When the person accepted uncertainty instead of resisting it, the mind softened. There was a shift from asking, "How do I stop thinking?" to "Why am I afraid of not thinking?" The answer was subtle but profound. Without thinking, the person feared being vulnerable. Thinking created distance from pain, but distance also blocked joy, spontaneity, and intuition. Jung believed intuition was a valid form of knowing, but overthinking silences it. Slowly, the person began to act without overanalyzing every step. Small actions, speaking honestly, resting without guilt, choosing what felt meaningful rather than impressive. Each action weakened the grip of excessive thought. Experience replaced speculation. Life became the teacher instead of the mind. Dreams changed too. They became clearer, more symbolic, less chaotic. Jung believed dreams were messages from the unconscious seeking balance. As waking life became more honest, dreams no longer needed to shout. The psyche relaxed when it felt heard. Overthinking did not disappear completely. It returned during stress, change, and uncertainty. But now it was recognized as a sign, not a failure. When thoughts intensified, the person paused and asked, "What is being avoided? What needs attention?" This question transformed overthinking into guidance. The greatest lesson was this: peace does not come from controlling the mind, but from understanding it. Overthinking stops when life is integrated, when thinking, feeling, intuition, and instinct are allowed to coexist. Jung believed that what we resist persists, but what we accept transforms. The mind quiets not when it is silenced, it is trusted enough to rest. One morning, sunlight entered the room, and the person noticed something simple yet extraordinary. The mind was quiet, not empty, but spacious. Thoughts came and went, but they no longer dragged identity with them. There was a sense of being rooted in something deeper than thought. Overthinking had loosened its grip, not because it was defeated, but because it was no longer needed.